On today's show, we have Marlene Orozco, the lead research analyst at the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative at Stanford Graduate School of Business. With a PhD in sociology and a master's in education policy and management, Marlene plays a crucial role in advancing Latino entrepreneurship through her research, which highlights the unique challenges Hispanic business owners face, particularly in accessing capital. Her work not only informs policy and practice, but also supports initiatives that empower underrepresented entrepreneurs, including collaborations with organizations like Angeles. Please join me in welcoming Marlene to the show. Marlene, welcome. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to get started by asking you to introduce folks who are less familiar with it to the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative and talking to us a little bit about not just the history of the initiative, but why it was founded.
Sure. So the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative is actually coming up on its 10th anniversary. And it was started by a visionary, Dr. Jerry Porras, who's a professor emeritus at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. And you might know him as co-author of a very popular business book, Built to Last. And he got together with a group of Latino MBAs to really solve around creating an organization that would advance Latinos in the United States from an economic perspective. I think they did kind of an environmental scan of sorts and found that there were several organizations that were servicing Latinos in terms of education or health, but not many focused on economics. And in fact, the goal of the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative is to advance research to support policymakers and decision makers in understanding the economic power and potential of Latino entrepreneurs in the United States. Certainly, we know that Latinos are a fast-growing population, but I think what is lesser known is that Latinos are starting businesses at a much faster rate than all other demographic groups. And so with this, having the appropriate support and resources to ensure that those businesses are scaling is critical. And so our research informs that growth and scale and has also actually informed an executive education program out of the GSB that supports the continual growth and scaling of existing Latino businesses. And so that is a little bit about the initiative. We collaborate with the nonprofit, the Latino Business Action Network, who really runs the program and does a lot of the the direct support of the entrepreneurs that go through that program, and also kind of the post program ensures that there is kind of a collective support and ongoing support of the entrepreneurs.
So it's fascinating. We at Venturefield, we have a strategic partnership with Angeles Investors. Our founder sits on their board and has, I think, since their launch and sat on their advisory committee. So we spent a lot of time looking at Latino and Hispanic founders and entrepreneurship in the United States. You talked about the demographics. Hispanic as a demographic are one of the fastest growing, I think, based on the latest census. And you talk about entrepreneurship, they are also starting businesses, right? One of the most entrepreneurial cohorts in the US population demographically. They're starting businesses at a faster rate. So, but where is the gap? Because there is a fascinating gap in terms of the economic value of those businesses driven by specifically this question around access to capital, right? I know, and I'm hitting you with a question that wasn't necessarily one that we talked about before, but just based on what you said, because it's so fascinating, right? You'd think everything was all green and great for Hispanic entrepreneurs in the US. They come from one of the fastest growing demographics. They're serving one of the fastest growing demographics. And they're starting businesses at unprecedented rates. But why are initiatives like this necessary? What are some of the gaps that they're facing?
So there's an immense opportunity gap. We actually conducted a thought experiment and we asked ourselves, what would happen if the existing number of Latino businesses were supported to grow in revenue on par to their white counterparts? And we found that there would be an additional $1.4 trillion added to the US economy. And so there's an immense opportunity gap, again, to continue to support and scale and ensure the ongoing success of the existing businesses. We estimate that there's about 5 million US Latino businesses in the United States. However, they start small and stay small. So many of these businesses are micro businesses or are, they're solopreneurs. They're run by a single individual. So an important threshold that needs to, or an important threshold that Latino entrepreneurs need to cross is going from a solopreneur, a self-employed individual, to an employer business, hiring your first paid employee, oftentimes outside of your own family. And so that is an immense gap and an immense bottleneck that needs to happen. And in order to do that, you need capital. And so year after year, we dive deep into what the capital experiences are of Latino business owners. And we find that they are not being financed from traditional lenders for small businesses, which historically have been large national banks. In fact, we found that for Latino business owners that request a loan from a national bank, their odds of loan approval are 60% lower when controlling for the industry that they're in, the revenue that they're generating, the number of employees that they have. So again, if you're comparing two businesses, a white business and a Latino business, and hold all of those things constant, Latinos have a 60% chance lower than getting approved. And in fact, there's been audit studies that have looked at very outright discriminatory practices by lending institutions for Black entrepreneurs compared to white entrepreneurs. They're asked a different level of questions upon entry, and are questioned about kind of the very existence of their business. And so there's some really real kind of disparate outcomes as it relates to lending. And capital access. And of course, we know that many of these businesses are being bootstrapped. They're started by personal funds, and you can only grow organically so much without external financing. And in fact, we looked at a growth framework, and one of the kind of key metrics of scalability is being able to secure external funding for growth, for being able to pay your employees, for being able to purchase equipment that is needed to scale. And so that is an immense challenge that, again, is contributing to the reality of many of these businesses starting small and staying small.
So these are fascinating topics. Before we go further into the discussion around how the initiative is helping to make folks aware of these gaps and opportunities, right? Because it would be a huge boon to the economy if we were able to provide more access to capital and help these entrepreneurs scale. Can you talk to us a little bit about your journey into the field of entrepreneurship research and specifically focusing on Latino entrepreneurs?
Absolutely. So I'm coming into the entrepreneurial landscape from a research perspective. So I was pursuing my PhD while at Stanford. And prior to that, I was kind of in the education world and was seeking to do research that was very applied in nature, that would speak directly to impact, rather than staying within the ivory tower and kind of in peer review journals that very few people read, right? So I wanted kind of that direct communication connection to community and to policy and to decision makers. And so I came across an opportunity at the business school. It was this new initiative, the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative, that was actually seeking researchers. They had just collected their first wave of data and they needed somebody to analyze these data. And quite frankly, it was a challenge to get anybody that was an academic to be interested in this topic. And certainly kind of even more limited in nature, having somebody who identifies as Latino to be the one kind of at the forefront. So I saw kind of a wide open opportunity here, and came on board. And in fact, I connected personally to the research agenda. I come from an immigrant family, and immigrants, in fact, start businesses at a faster rate than U.S. native-born individuals. And I saw this within my own family. We had a Mexican restaurant growing up, Taqueria San Diego, in Chicago. We had that business for a few years. It's largely run by my mother. My father was working full-time as a construction worker. He never had the safety net to leave his full-time position as a construction laborer to support my mom in the restaurant. And so the runway was rather limited there in terms of what we could do with very limited employees. But I began to then reflect and analyze again on what some of the pitfalls were that my own parents experienced. My dad was a very successful, brick mason and in Chicago, and tried to start his own construction company a few times and failed miserably. So he had certainly the construction capabilities, but lacked the business acumen to be able to scale and grow his own construction company. And so I was applying that lived experience, that perspective, to the data that we were gathering and to the stories then that we would then collect from entrepreneurs to bring to life what some of the findings were for the data that we collect on an annual basis. And it's a very large survey. It's grown to about 10,000 businesses on an annual basis. So it's a really great lens upon which we can look at what, again, some of the existing trends, opportunities, and challenges are for Latino businesses.
And 10,000 businesses across the U.S.
Across the United States and Puerto Rico, correct.
Okay. As the lead research analyst at the initiative, what are some of the most impactful projects you've led, and how have they contributed to understanding this landscape? I mean, you just talked a bit about the survey, but then you also talk about, you came into this work because you didn't want to stay in this quote unquote ivory tower of academia. How do you then help get this work beyond Stanford's campus, impacting these entrepreneurs and impacting the community?
So I'll start with impacting Stanford's campus. CEMEX Auditorium is a big space at the Stanford GSB, and it's in fact named after a Latino construction company. And every year there is an annual forum that is held at CEMEX Auditorium that unveils the latest research. And it's grown to over 1,000 participants at that auditorium. There is kind of overflow rooms that have to happen, hearing the latest on the state of Latino entrepreneurship. So that I think is a really critical moment, because Latino entrepreneurship is center stage. Latino entrepreneurs are sharing their stories. There's a big media frenzy engagement around that as well. And it's really important, again, not just to have kind of the quantitative backing, right, the research findings, but also entrepreneurs on the stage telling their story. And it's really impactful to have, current college students see that. We have oftentimes buses of high school kids come in to hear the state of Latino entrepreneurship. And I often think about, it's really hard to be something that you can't see. And so we're putting up on center stage success stories of Latino entrepreneurs who have scaled their businesses, are generating over $1 million in annual revenue. They talk about their trials, tribulations, but also it's important to hear their success. And so that, again, happens on an annual basis. The next event is happening March 27th in next year at CEMEX Auditorium. And in addition to that, we've been very successful at collaborating with a number of institutions that have the ears of politicians. So, for instance, we collaborated on research with the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. We did a report with the U.S. Joint Economic Committee. We did a briefing with the California State Treasurer. So there are many opportunities to disseminate this research. And again, ensure that decision makers, policymakers, business leaders are hearing not just that they're the stories that are covered in the media, negative immigration stories. Latinos are coming and taking your jobs. Latinos are creating jobs for others. In fact, there is a report that comes out of the Latino Donor Collaborative that has quantified the Latino contributions in the United States. The Latino GDP most recently was $3.6 trillion. If all of the Latinos in the United States were their own country, it would be the 5th largest economy in the world. And so these are the stories, these are the narratives that we want to ensure that the media has, and again, that policymakers have. So there's growing an immense power there, but again, the challenges to ensure continued success remain, and unlocking the full potential of existing businesses is something that we want to make sure that there are policy solutions supporting.
How have the reports and this research, I mean, you talk about the research, you talk about the forum, attendance to the forum, across the spectrum of everything from high school, college students, all the way through up to other entrepreneurs, investors, executives, academics, and the impact of the media, right? I mean, we're living in a completely mediated society. You can be doing the most amazing work in the world, but if the media is not picking up the narratives and helping to amplify the story, then it's very difficult to have an impact and change people's perceptions. Um, but so how have the reports and the work that you're doing to increase awareness around this data um, influence the perceptions of policymakers and investors about the needs that Hispanic entrepreneurs in particular have to overcome some of the systemic barriers to access to capital and to scale?
So I think I'll take a case study of what happened throughout the course of the COVID-19 pandemic. So our research had been ongoing prior to then. It really laid the foundation for an understanding of the capital landscape for Latino businesses. As I mentioned, we had found and reported on the fact that Latinos were not getting funding from traditional sources, from national banks, and in fact were denied their loans at a 60% higher rate than their white counterparts. And so, given that reality, when there was relief coming throughout the course of the pandemic from the SBA, primarily through the Paycheck Protection Program, these funds were being dispersed through large national banks. And so they were not getting into the hands of the businesses that were largely impacted, many in the service industry. Latinos over-index in, restaurants, accommodation, hospitality, and so they were not getting the resources that they needed to ensure to survive throughout the course of the pandemic. And our research had found that many of the banks that were putting in the work and the relationship building were in fact smaller local banks and community development financial institutions, CDFIs. And so there was a lot of organizations that banded together to really ensure that the next wave of the Paycheck Protection Program funding would be able to be dispersed through these CDFIs. And that was a critical lifeline for Latino businesses. And so I think, again, this was a really kind of direct, certainly can't attribute it all to the research, but it was being informed, it ensured that the business leaders were informed, certainly, and had real data to back what some of their positions were. And so that was a critical perspective. I think we've seen a lot of banks and corporations, when they roll out new programs or grant opportunities to support Latino entrepreneurs and other historically underrepresented groups, oftentimes they will cite the research that comes out of the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative. So it's really helpful, again, to have some of the data points to support the why. Why are you advancing this program? And so those are a few of the instances, certainly, that I can pinpoint kind of on a macro scale. And then, of course, we see just the effort of the executive education program supporting entrepreneurs on a more individual level, right? There is over 1,000 individuals who have gone through this program. And a mantra of the program is to do business with each other and get business for each other. And these are Latino entrepreneurs, again, that are leaders in their communities. They come from any number of businesses. They're winemakers. They own chains of restaurants, grocery stores. They're in the tech industry. And certainly you might say, well, what do they have in common, right? And the reality is that they have a shared cultural experience and they're going through this together. And when there is a need, right? So throughout the course of the pandemic, I think about what happened to Maria Palacios, she has her own coffee company, Progeny Coffee, and she was servicing directly to the large companies in the Bay Area. So her business model was largely B2B, but when that closed down, she lost 98% of her revenue because everybody was working from home and no longer drinking coffee at work. And so she needed to quickly pivot and become B2C and go directly to the consumers, to the employees of these big companies that she had been servicing. And she relied on the program, on her cohort, and they supported her in quickly putting up a website pro bono and making sure that her e-commerce line was together to ensure her ongoing survival. And she's had immense and wild success sourcing coffee straight from Colombia and telling the stories of the farmers who are sourcing the beans. And so, I think it just shows the power of network. And being really intentional about building that network, because in addition to having challenges accessing capital, our research often also pointed to a limited network and lack of mentorship for scaling businesses, for scaling Latino businesses. And so the program is servicing those needs as well.
It's amazing. I love all those anecdotes. They resonate tremendously. My father worked for the Small Business Administration for many years after moving to the United States, to New York from Puerto Rico. And many of his closest friends and clients were actually other entrepreneurs from the Caribbean whose businesses he was helping, and this is years ago in New York. But we see that in our work at Venture Fuel through a lot of the accelerator programs that we run, which is, it's not just about access to capital. Certainly you do need capital, but the network is often the critical difference between success and, I don't want to say failure, but the inability to scale, right? And as you said before, staying as a solopreneur, or having that ambition and the ability to realize it. How does your work open you up to other collaborations and collaborative initiatives? A lot of what we believe around innovation ecosystem and scaling, helping entrepreneurs scale, we talk about the individual one-to-one network and relationships, but also it requires a lot of collaboration across organizations. So I talked a little bit before about our relationship with Angeles. We also collaborate with an organization called the Rogue Women's Fund. Like, we call them nodes in the ecosystem. From the initiative, what other nodes in the ecosystem are you working with to help advance Hispanic entrepreneurship in the U.S.?
So the Latino Business Action Network would be our central node. They are out there fundraising. We have a really interesting model where the research exists out of Stanford GSB, but the research is actually sponsored and supported by the Latino Business Action Network. So they are a collective force and they're forming these partnerships with corporations, with government, with financial institutions. A big part of the research in terms of challenges that we uncovered as well are the challenges related to access to contracts and procurement. As part of our growth framework, we found that being able to contract with government and large corporations is highly correlated to scalability and growth. But of course, that is a process in terms of being able to become certified as a minority business enterprise, or as a small business, or as a woman-owned business. And so, these partner organizations support in the nurturing of these relationships to ensure that entrepreneurs, one, are informed that there are opportunities to contract with government and corporations, and what the doors of opportunity are there, and then also support in the process. Of course, it's kind of an extensive application process that could be intimidating for some, and certainly we saw that for Latinas in particular in accessing capital. Oftentimes they don't request funding because they feel that they need to have, beyond what is requested, beyond the 3 years of financial statements. They want to put a package together of 5 to 10 years. And so, ensuring readiness for contracting opportunities with some of these collaborating organizations. With financial institutions, there's a part of the program that ensures a capital matchmaking session at the end. So whether the entrepreneurs are presently looking for funding or not, it is still a really good experience and opportunity to pitch your story, to to sell your business to both debt lenders and equity lenders. And so getting that experience so that if and when they are in a position to be ready and needing that financing, they will have had that experience. And so building those relationships with capital providers before you need money is critical as well. And so that's part embedded in the program. There are there's a formal mentorship model where each entrepreneur is paired with and they don't have to be Latino, but somebody who can, fill a need that the business has related to marketing or related to capital, contracting, what have you. And so there are really direct opportunities to engage with professionals in that way as well. But there are several organizations, I think, that are growing and working in support of Latino entrepreneurs and small businesses. And so, collaboration is key here. I think we're all rowing our boats in the same direction. And so knowing that what other programs exist, and of course referring individuals, I think is always a critical component of this work as well.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and helping entrepreneurs overcome maybe it's like a hesitation, or like the example you gave, or I want to be able to provide 5 to 10 years worth of financials. Well, you don't need to, right? Like, let's get you in the door, let's get you some first access to some to funds that will help you get to that next level of growth, and then think about that longer term situation. But really, like, just ensuring that you are not preventing opportunities for yourself simply because you don't have the coaching, the mentorship, the knowledge in order to benefit from those programs that do exist out there, and raising awareness around those is so important. Looking ahead, what future research areas do you see as crucial, and how are you expanding your research, if at all, based on how the landscape is evolving?
So when we started this work, certainly we dug very deep on understanding simply the demographics of Latino entrepreneurs, understanding what regions they're located in, what industries they're located in. I think that there's oftentimes a misconception that a Latino entrepreneur is singularly in a specific industry. And certainly, as I had mentioned before, Latinos over-index in food and accommodation, hospitality, and also construction. But Latinos are actually starting businesses across all industries. And one of the findings that we had, and that I think was a really stark finding, is that once Latino entrepreneurs cross that employer threshold, they are equally as likely as their white counterparts to have a tech business. Of course, the number is small, right? Because it's once you cross that threshold. But I think it's important to think about the opportunity and the potential of these businesses of Latino businesses in the innovation economy in particular. And so, in terms of future research, we want to unpack specifically the challenges and the opportunities as it relates to businesses that are kind of in Latino businesses that are in the tech space. And continue to unpack that. Of course, there's a growing wave of tools and technologies, generative AI, that is also supporting kind of the day-to-day existence and operations of smaller businesses, of brick and mortar businesses. And so understanding how optimizing some of these efficiencies, optimizing some of these processes could also support the growth of these businesses is another area that we want to continue to explore and unpack. I think that we're living in exciting times in terms of, again, the potential of technology for back office operations, for payroll, for any number of, again, day-to-day operations. And if we can directly support and provide technical assistance to business owners, and kind of opening their appetite for leveraging new tools and technologies, I think that is also something that we want to further explore as an avenue.
That's fascinating. And we do a lot of work in AI, generative AI, with one of our clients. And it is true, there are so much opportunity out there in technology. And I think, we saw this with the expansion of digital tools, lowered the barrier to entry years ago in general, in terms of access to like platforms for communication, access directly to consumers, access directly to audiences, and circumventing some of the traditional investments required, right? In order to reach an audience, you used to have to go on TV. Now I sound like a dinosaur, like 100 years ago with your business, but now, the ability through other platforms like social media and search, we're going through another big wave of the democratization of access to information and capabilities that will help you scale in the absence of certain capital requirements, certainly around technology startups. So it'll be very interesting to watch how your research evolves and how that affects and potentially helps to accelerate the pace for Hispanic and Latino entrepreneurs in the United States. Marlene, we are out of time today, but before we wrap up, I wanted to ask you, where can people go to learn more about the Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative and your research and events like the forum that happen in the spring?
Yeah, so there is a growing body of research. I mean, you can just Google SLEI, Stanford Latino Entrepreneurship Initiative, or go directly to gsb.stanford.edu/SLEI, SLEI, for more information.
Awesome. Marlene, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.